Welcome to the second episode of Remarkable Life with Rett Syndrome. In this episode, our families talk about the Rett Syndrome related issues like therapy they found useful, equipment they've used, how the pandemic has changed their life, and the hardest parts about Rett Syndrome.
What has been the biggest medical issue for your child? We have been, touch wood, pretty lucky to date with Abigail. The biggest challenges that I've had have been breathing issues, breath holding. We went through a period where Abigail was holding her breath until she basically fell to the ground. She went into a pre-faint and then she'd hit the ground and start breathing again. A lot of breath holding and hyperventilation, digestion issues. Of course, the fact that she can't communicate using words or use her hands are ongoing challenges, and that's been really the main difficulty day to day. She walks, but she has a lot of trouble with motor planning, so working out how to move and where to go. She struggles with navigating up, down simple steps and things like that, so even though she walks, it's not always straightforward. So there's a lot of pressure in keeping her safe while she is so mobile.
So far we have been really lucky. Savannah doesn't crawl, she doesn't walk. And she has pretty well lost her ability to talk and lost her left hand. But she still can grasp with her right hand, but Savannah is currently seizure-free. She is currently eating orally and swallowing and doing everything by mouth. She is not having to be fed by a feeding tube as of this point. And she does not have any heart issues. Long QT syndrome is a big deal for our kids. It's a common occurrence, especially in Savannah's mutation. So we've been really fortunate that so far we're not seeing a whole lot of medical issues. She's just got that hypotonia, the low muscle tone that really causes her to be behind.
The one thing we've battled the most with her is her chronic pneumonia, chronic illness. The first year of life, she got sick at 5 months and didn't stop. It was always lung-related. She's been on nebulizers constantly, and we did end up in the ER one time so far. The latest has been her seizure-like episodes, although she's not been diagnosed with a seizure disorder yet.
The biggest thing would be if she does get sick, it lingers for so long that even if it is a viral cold, it ends up settling in her nasal cavities, and we end up with an antibiotic. But so far, fingers crossed, we haven't had any extensive hospital stays yet or anything like that other than for testing.
For my son, his biggest medical issue would be feeding. He doesn't feed himself. He only eats puree, which this has been huge for us. We've been working on him eating by mouth for almost 4 years. So that's huge, but definitely feeding. But at the beginning, it was seizures. Parker suffered from infantile spasms, which is a type of seizure disorder, and he was having up to 500 seizures a day. And it was a very long treatment plan of high-dose steroids that caused a lot of other issues. Sleep apnea, extreme weight gain. Because of all that, he was just having trouble breathing in general. He was 28 pounds at 8 months old because of the steroid treatment he needed for the infantile spasms.
Yeah, thankfully we don't have any big health concerns. Tilly's still young. She's not even 2.5 yet. So we're hoping we can outrun Rett in that way.
Right now, the biggest medical issue that Olivia is having is sleep apnea. A month ago, she was diagnosed with severe mixed central and obstructive sleep apnea. Obstructive apnea is when your brain tries to trigger a breath, but it's obstructed. Central apnea is when your brain forgets to trigger a breath. About 2 weeks ago, she had her tonsils and her adenoids removed in order to help improve the obstructive apnea, but we are now, faced with the central apnea, and so it's more of a Rett thing. Her brain's not triggering this bodily function that, it just comes so easily to everyone else. So we're dealing with her neurologist, respiratory specialist, and Rett specialist as well to figure out what the best game plan is. But most likely she will be on a CPAP when she sleeps, both during naps and at night.
What therapies have been useful to our child? The biggest ones that we've seen the biggest success in is the PT, OT, and speech. All of those together, I think, help Aaliyah express herself and continue to gain skills that we thought we may never gain without them.
Right now, we are starting ABA therapy. We've been doing ABA therapy for several weeks, and I think that's been so helpful. It's just so intensive in nature, but it's also really holistic, so it touches on speech, it touches on OT. It's really about the whole person and trying to help them have the best quality of life. We have had physical therapy for the last year. I feel really close to her physical therapist, and it just doesn't feel like a complete week if we haven't seen Angie, her physical therapist. Also starting horseback riding lessons, and we are doing ABM, which is the thought that the brain is easily transformed, and that there's some plasticity with the brain, so we're hoping that that'll help.
Parker is in physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and feeding therapy. All of them have been very beneficial for him, but I would say physical therapy and feeding therapy have been the most beneficial.
All of them. We started with physical therapy. We have occupational, speech, special instruction. All of them have been amazing. But I think that our primary focus falls into physical therapy and then occupational therapy.
My daughter does physical therapy. She does occupational therapy. She does speech therapy. And she loosely does hippotherapy, which is work on a horse. So with physical therapy, even through her regression, she's slowly getting stronger and she's slowly getting better at standing. We're not sure if she's ever going to be able to crawl because it is so difficult for the brain to send messages to the body for a crawl because you're trying to move 4 parts of the body. But she's working on standing and she's trying so hard to learn how to walk, and she's not there yet. But we're hoping that in the next couple years she can get there. So physical therapy has been huge for her. And occupational therapy has been huge because we feel like she has maintained her right hand because of her constant occupational therapy and her constantly feeding herself, so that she hasn't completely lost the use of her right hand while she's gone through a huge regression. And for speech therapy, I mean, that has been huge for her because she's learning to communicate in ways that I never would have thought of. Her ability to really transform her face to let me know what she is thinking is incredible.
Occupational therapy has been really useful for us with Abigail. It's also been useful for me in teaching me strategies and how to help my child. Physio has been really useful. Physio we work hard at in terms of keeping Abigail's strength, building up her core strength, making it easier for her to sit so she can participate in things more readily. Speech has been useful. particularly when we got the Rett Syndrome diagnosis and realised that vocal or verbal communication may not be the way that Abigail will communicate. Speech gave us the confidence to start exploring augmentative and alternative communication, so things like pod books, and now we're using an eye gaze device and learning how to use pod on an eye gaze. That's been life-changing. Behaviour therapy in Rett Syndrome can be useful, so teaching strategies, teaching your child basic skills depending on where they're at, or even teaching them to cooperate with you brushing their teeth and so on, because certainly for the younger children, we've got to remember, yes, you know, there's a 4-year-old with Rett Syndrome, but there's also just a 4-year-old who's going to have all the same challenges and behaviours that a typical 4-year-old will have.
My daughter is currently receiving occupational therapy to work on eating skills and use of her hands. She's receiving physical therapy to work on pretty much everything. My daughter is 2 years old and she is completely immobile. She can't even transition between positions, so pretty much she can sit independently, and that's the extent of it. My daughter is also receiving speech therapy. She does babble. She's never had any words. However, speech is primarily teaching her to use her eye gaze device, and which has been an awesome piece of technology to have. My daughter looks at the screen, and the screen has camera that tracks her eyes. So the picture that her eyes land on, it'll speak a word or a phrase associated with that picture, and hopefully down the line she'll be able to communicate full thoughts with this device.
What equipment has been useful? A high-low chair has been really useful for us with Abigail, being able to adjust her at different heights to sit at tables, making it easy for her to get in and out of a chair, making it easy for me to get her in and out of a chair. That's been a really great advantage, and also a chair with structural support around the core of the body has been really useful. She's more comfortable, and it also increases her ability to use her hands when the rest of her body is supported. Hand mitts. I found some hand mitts that they look like little toddler boxing gloves. They protected the skin integrity when she was going through periods of really bad mouthing of her hands. Another thing that's been really useful is a wrist splint that isolates her thumb. That actually helps with her hand function, developing her pincer grip. The eye gaze device has been great, but we're still very much learners. We're emerging communicators with it, but the eye gaze has certainly been something that has started to make a real difference to our day-to-day lives. Arm braces have been a great bit of equipment for us. I would say don't be scared to use them. Initially, I found it quite confronting to think that I would put something that would stop my child from bending her arm. She is not bothered by it at all, and it has really saved her from really hurting her hand through her mouthing. It's kept the skin healthy, and in actual fact she can use her hands more when she is wearing her braces. So please don't be scared of them. They're a really useful bit of equipment if your child is having issues with mouthing their hands.
Well, we just got our wheelchair, so that's really exciting. We haven't had a whole lot of experience with equipment, but she wasn't able to stand on her own, and we got her a stander, which allows her to be placed in a standing position and bear some weight into her feet. And that has really helped strengthen her. It helps with bone density, which is huge and important, but we can't see that. But it's also helped her learn to bear weight on her legs, and she's getting better at standing now, just holding onto a bar.
She also recently received a stander, so that allows her to be fully assisted in standing, and so her bones can develop as they should, and her legs can strengthen muscle. Her neck strengthens and muscle being upright and having to keep it up from leaning to the side or forward. And so that's been great to have, that she can still be building those muscles and those correct bone formations and strength while I can be cooking supper and folding laundry and things that still need to get done.
We use orthotics. We've used them for probably 2 years now. We started with SMOs and now we're in AFOs. Her stander, we had a loaner for a while through our early intervention program. Gait trainer, adaptive stroller, and adaptive car seat.
Equipment has been the most useful.
Straps.
We've recently gotten the AAC device.
Yeah, exactly.
The eye tracking.
Yeah.
Speech, and I think she likes the feedback of pointing at things with her eyes and getting it, but we also are getting good communication out of her. We can know when she's wants more food or when she wants to stop doing something. She can tell us that stuff.
Yeah, extremely important.
How does your son or daughter communicate? Well, she's currently trialing an eye gaze device, which has been wonderful for her to be able to look at a computer and for it to talk for her by looking at the options that she's choosing. But generally she uses a PEC system, a picture exchange communication. So she looks at the picture that she wants to communicate to us, and so we just give her options and she chooses from there. And that's huge. She also does some head nodding and some head shaking, although that's not consistent whether or not her body allows her to do it, but it's always a good method for us to try first. And she'll randomly spit out words, which is really exciting to see, but when she can get those words out, it's really nice. One of her favorite words is apple pie, so you can guess that she eats a lot of apple pie around here, because if it'll make her say a word, she can have it.
My son is learning how to communicate with an AAC device. He uses Prolo to go right now. He's not consistent in it yet. He's 4. So other ways he communicates is he will bring me his bottle if he's thirsty. He will bring me toys he wants to play with. He also knows some signs. He knows more, thirsty, mommy, daddy, go, happy, shows.
Eye gaze, and we model to her using a pod book. She does vocalize. So she's at the moment 5, so she finds a way to tell me what she thinks pretty much every day, even though it's not using words. She communicates using her body. She will move and stand towards something that she needs. So for example, if she's hungry, she'll come and stand next to the table where she eats. The other night she was particularly hungry, so she climbed into her own chair to make sure I really understood it was time to hurry up. Abigail has also managed to reach her hand out and touch things to make a selection. So for example, if we present her with a selection of books, she can reach out and touch which one she wants. So we're working on that to turn that into a yes, so she can actually learn to say yes or no, which will also open up a whole lot more communication for us.
How does your daughter communicate?
By mostly like squealing.
Yeah.
And sometimes she says like bee or like bear or like that or like muh.
Yeah. We can listen to her vocalizations and kind of figure out, for the most part, how she feels. Sometimes we'll hear her squealing and we don't know if it's like a glee squeal or an anger squeal.
Yeah, her facial expressions, I feel like, are the best way to know her mood, and definitely she talks a lot with her eyes. Her nonverbal communication is usually pretty accurate. And then we just started our AAC trial with eye gaze, and that has been also really successful.
We right now are trialing an AAC machine in hopes of getting her one. We also use a little bit of sign language. She has about 10 or so words, not consistently used, but we do get by with those. And she doesn't point, but she will like slap things, you know, like a picture on a picture board. And then other than that, she just kind of goes to what she wants, and shows us if we can't get it or we have a meltdown, but typically we'll figure it out eventually.
How does your son or daughter communicate? With her face, with her body, with her eyes. We do work on picture communication, and we're hoping to get set up with an eye gaze device. But her face says everything, and we always communicate with her.
How has the pandemic affected your daily lives?
I think the complexity of not having many therapists who can come into your home, and a 2-year-old doesn't really look at a screen. A typical 2-year-old won't look at a screen and answer questions. So having a child with Rett Syndrome who's 2 years old and engaging in therapy via telehealth just wasn't really an option, and we knew that really quickly that wouldn't be the greatest path.
We had her in daycare before the pandemic hit, and honestly, the pandemic and her diagnosis all kind of happened within the same month. So it was a very hectic month for us. But I think overall it's been good because she's been around us a lot more than if she were at daycare.
I mentioned earlier we were in the early intervention program. Aaliyah aged out of that at 3 years old, which was March. So then we had a worldwide pandemic, and with that came the complete stop of services at the same time we aged out of her program. So with that being said, we I don't know that it was a true regression, but we lost some skills that we had worked really, really hard to get. So that's the biggest thing, and the different routine for her really threw her off. She loves to go. She loved to when people would come to the house and see her. Now that she's over 3 and it's safe, we are actually doing her school program, doing therapy that way, and outpatient, all one-on-one. So biggest thing would be her just not having the support she needed through the pandemic.
If we're talking about with our daughter, it has improved our lives. I've been able to spend more time with her and focus on her and be able to work harder than ever with her therapies, and she has excelled during this time.
The pandemic has been tough. When we were in the throes of isolation in Canberra, all of Abigail's therapists, school and activities went, which left everything up to me, which was really hard for both me and for Abigail. I'm not a therapist, I'm a mum. And whilst I do my best, that's not my strength. And also I find that Abigail doesn't want me to be her therapist. So I'll try and set up an activity and she'll be, "What are you doing, Mum? You don't do this, you're my mum. My therapist does that." So that was a bit of a challenge. It was pretty isolating, and I think Abigail was pretty bored, and I found it pretty tough. We're lucky here in Canberra that things are getting easier, so we are slowly getting back to some of our activities, which has been great.
With Rett syndrome, because they are typically hypotonic and they can't have a productive cough, it's a lot easier for them to get pneumonia. And because of it, we've just been really protective of her. She was in the hospital in December for a few days for RSV, which should have been like a typical cold for her at her age, but it wasn't. I watched her turn blue in the hospital and watched her oxygen dip down into the 20s for a brief moment. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life. And she did get a mild case of pneumonia after recovering from the RSV. So the pandemic has really kept us in our own home because it's not worth it to us to expose her and risk her more than we need to. We're really hoping that as herd immunity develops, as vaccines happen, that we can start living a more normal semblance of life. But my husband took a few months off of work, and now he's back at work. Thankfully, he's working mostly by himself. But my son is now starting his kindergarten year with me as his teacher and a teacher in a virtual learning situation. And she is absolutely fantastic, thank goodness. But that has been a big effect on us, is that our son is no longer free to live his life at the moment. Savannah has also switched all her therapies to telehealth, but looking at that, she is the rare exception where she just engages and loves therapy. And I know a lot of kids have lost a lot of therapy because of the pandemic, because they just can't focus on it, and I don't blame them. It would be hard to do. I think we all can admit that it's hard to sit on a video call and really pay attention. And so when you're looking at a little kid doing it, of course that they're going to be affected and it's not going to go well. But I'm so proud that Savannah has been pushing so hard in therapy, even through the telehealth and through all this pandemic.
The hardest part about Rett syndrome, I've got to say, honestly, it's the unknown. Not knowing, what is to come or what each day may bring. We may wake up and have a beautiful day, and 3 hours later it might be what I call a Rett day,
Benjamin, what's the hardest part about Rett syndrome?
Tilly screaming in your face.
Tilly will scream in your face.
I think the hardest part is the sleep.
Yeah,
She doesn't sleep.
lack of sleep.
She doesn't sleep that well. She doesn't fall asleep easily. You really have to spend a lot of time with her to get her down. She'll wake up many times during the night like she's an infant. And it's caused a lot of strain at times.
Yeah. Lack of sleep by far. I think we can work with all of the 8 therapists we see and coordinate schedules, but lack of sleep is by far the worst.
For me, the hardest part about Rett syndrome is the impact on communication. I always say if I could change one thing right now about Rett syndrome, I'd give my daughter the ability to speak, so she could just tell me what's going on, so she could explain to me what she needs, why she's scared, what she's frustrated about, so she could tell me her thoughts. That would just change everything.
I think just dealing with day-to-day and regression, as her younger sister gets older and does things that Olivia is still not able to do, it is hard for me personally to see that. And so those are very bittersweet moments that I have, as a mom, very bittersweet moments that I experience as a mom between my 2 children.
The hardest part about Rett syndrome for me personally is not being able to have a conversation with my son. I don't get to hear how his day was from him. I don't get to hear him say he wants to go play on a slide, or that his feelings are hurt, or that he slept well or he didn't sleep well. So yeah, that's just definitely the hardest part for me.
By far, the hardest part about Rett syndrome is the unknowns. Rett syndrome is so different for every single case that knowing that regression is likely, but you don't know when it's going to hit, for how long, how hard, what is going to be lost. You don't know if there could be a regaining of skills down the road after regression has subsided. And that is the hardest part of Rett syndrome, is literally having to take one moment at a time, one day at a time. And my personality is very much a planner. I like things to be organized. I'm also I daydream, and so I had all of these ideas of things that my daughter and I would do together, things that my daughter and future kids would do together, and not knowing what of that can still happen or how it can be adapted. It does. It takes a period of mourning to adjust that life is going to be different, and we have no idea how. It's literally just as things change, we adjust.
Everything. I think that it's knowing that it's Rett syndrome and knowing everything about it, what it has to offer, makes it that much harder.
The hardest part, I'm sorry, I'll get emotional here. The hardest part about Rett syndrome is watching your child try so hard and fail because their body just won't let them do it. It's extremely difficult watching them know that their body should do it for them, that they've done it in the past, and all of a sudden, I can't do this. And watching your child fight through that frustration, that's the most difficult part for me. I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional about that part still.
Any misconceptions about Rett syndrome? What are you always correcting people on when it comes to your child and Rett? I don't think that I correct anybody because nobody has any idea about Rett syndrome. I do get the comments like, well, she'll do things in her own time and you never know. And although all of that is true, I still know the unfortunate things that could happen.
The biggest misconception I feel is that boys don't have Rett syndrome, or if they do have Rett syndrome, they will pass away, they tell you, before the age of 2 years old. My son's 4. My son walks. My son eats by mouth. Okay. My son has interests. He has friends. He's nonverbal, but so is his best friend. So it's a huge misconception that boys cannot survive Rett syndrome or even much less thrive with Rett syndrome. I wish I could tell the whole world that.
Well, the silly thing that I'm always correcting people on is that it is Rett syndrome, not Rett's. But that's not really important. The big thing that I'm always correcting people on is people saying, oh, well, I'm sure she'll just get better. And people really don't realize that this is a genetic disorder, that this is not something that just fixes overnight. This is not something she's going to grow out of. This is something she's got to live with for the rest of her life. And I feel like that is something I have to correct people on a lot.
Okay, the biggest misconception about Rett syndrome is that my daughter doesn't understand. I find that so frustrating, that people see my child and don't believe in her potential. I am always telling people to stop talking about my daughter as if she's not there. Don't talk about her in front of her. She's listening like any other 5-year-old would be. She's smart, she's bright. Just because her body doesn't let her show us in a way that we might recognize, we can't assume that she doesn't understand. These kids have so much potential. They are so bright. It's up to us to find a way to help them communicate and help them learn in their way, not impose our way on them.
The biggest thing is, I've had people tell me, I'm sorry. Well, I'm not sorry. And I don't think that is polite for people to say, because it's basically saying, I'm sorry that, your child isn't typical. But we love Aaliyah for Aaliyah. So that, and the other thing, the misspelling. If you're gonna communicate about it, and especially when it's a doctor or someone like that and they spell Rett syndrome wrong, don't know why, but that bums me out pretty bad.
One of the biggest misconceptions about Rett syndrome is that her brain is not at an age-appropriate level. And so I love to reiterate to people to always assume competence. Olivia is smart. Olivia is just as capable as any other 3-year-old. Yes, you have to give her time to respond. You have to give her a chance to get there. But that's because she is fighting her body every single step of the way to give you an answer. but she's there. And you do sometimes have to wait up to a minute, up to 2 minutes for her to respond to you when you ask her something, but she is there.
Thank you so much for joining us for this second episode of Remarkable. Please join us for our next episode where our families talk a little bit more about their children with Rett syndrome. Don't forget to share this video. The more people that see this video and learn about Rett syndrome, the better. I'll catch you in